Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to talk about branding, and my branding took a bit of a hit this weekend because some of you in the audience are now picturing me with a kilt on because we had a charity event on the weekend, and amongst other things that I have the honor and privilege to do is I'm the honorary colonel of a local infantry regiment, which happens to be a Highland regiment. And so many of you got to see me in a skirt for the first time dancing around. So that is a brand association that we'll stop right there with. What I'm going to talk about, though, is building the OpenText brand and try and leverage, just to keep it very topical, some of the things that we just heard about the Internet of Things and how one would leverage a brand. The quick numbers on OpenText, it's about $2 billion in revenue. It's the largest company in this area called electronic information management, which is actually the sort of database, if you will, of everything you just heard about on the Internet of Things, and so on. But just to give you an idea of the rough numbers. The footprint, and this is an important sort of base setting, if you will, for what we're then going to talk about. So the footprint of the company is actually mostly not here. If you have global aspirations, Canada's GDP is about give or take 2% of the world GDP. So we're sort of 300 million people short of a real market, as they say. So it's a challenge for companies that are coming out of this area to think globally and not just locally. Now, customers, and this will just give you an idea of how we're going to get into this and brand association. If you squint and look carefully up there, our previous speaker talked about the London Underground. Well, there it is right there. All those videos she talked about is all run on OpenText software. Or we talked about Shell and the digital oil field. All of that database is run on OpenText. And so right away, what I'm starting to give you a sense of is brand association. OpenText as a brand, Fortune magazine ranked it 15th in growth in 2009 in the very depths of the Great Recession. Just this year, a few months ago, it was ranked 39th as a brand by the Globe and Mail in Canada. And as we'll get into, it's sort of remarkable because it's really an industrial brand. It's not a consumer brand. Financial Post ranked it top 10 places to work in Canada this past year. And then, of course, Gartner, and you can start to see how you go local to global. Gartner ranked OpenText #1 in electronic information management, which is that very specific area that is the database of the Internet of Things. And so here's the first maybe bit of learning. In Canada, OpenText is a corporate brand. Globally, OpenText is a technology brand. And so right away you start to think, oh, okay, what are those subtleties? So branding in Canada, OpenText's largest software company, as Jenny mentioned, yet in the world, it ranks 20th. And we're way behind the brands like Microsoft and Oracle and SAP. So that's a business challenge. Locally, you'd be the largest, but then when you go globally, you're the 20th. And again, as I mentioned, Canada, only 2% of the global market, yet OpenText has about 5% of its revenues in Canada, so double the global average. So very heavily invested in Canada, and yet cannot make Canada the scope for its brand identity. And in fact, that gets us to OpenText is not a consumer brand. And this is going to be a challenge because many startups, and I must say I'm going to address my comments to the startups in the room. I'm going to talk about different brand methods that you can use, and we're going to talk about Super Bowl ads and things like that. And you have to be careful when you start off because as we heard about the Internet of Things, that's not a retail exercise. Yes, it is a retail exercise for overall brand awareness. But when that CIO has to pick you to build an app for the Internet of Things, security matters a lot and confidence matters a lot. And sometimes that doesn't play very well with retail. And also, as maybe we'll get into in the discussion afterwards, OpenText actually started in the retail side. As we'll get into, OpenText was a search engine, and it was a product of the University of Waterloo as a spin-off. And yet we made a fateful decision, and another person on the panel was part of the board of directors at the time when we moved away from retail and went to industrial. So I'm talking now about OpenText today, but when we get into the discussion, you'll see that that was an evolutionary step. So I'm trying to save some of you in the audience a couple of evolutionary steps that we had to go through at OpenText. One of the things that we found, if you're going to pursue a retail brand, being in New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco or London or Tokyo helps a lot. Toronto's a good place, for sure, but when you go to cities that have the entire population of Canada in their city, it starts to give you an idea of where you might be best to put your efforts. Now, having said that, we could list half a dozen great success stories coming out of Canada in the last 5 years, and of course the granddaddy of it all, our Research in Motion, BlackBerry, was able to build a tremendous consumer brand right from here in Waterloo. But, you know, for the 1,000 or so startups, most of us have to sort of think maybe a little bit more focused. Now, why brand? Value creation. On a product side, it's the simplest way to explain it is no name versus branded, that price difference, that's the brand. Brand has a whole bunch of meanings that all lead to value. On the corporate side, companies listed on NASDAQ or NYSE or the TSX, same revenue and profits, yet the market values them differently. Why? That perception of success is equal to brand, equal to value. Brand matters. It is that intangible. And for many of us engineers, it's always a real challenge to go, well, brand doesn't matter as much as specs and performance and, you know, and all that sort of thing. And yet, the fact of the matter is brand does matter. So how do you brand? Well, brands, whoops, I must have done something. Brands cost time and money. What do you have more of? Because that drives a lot of your brand strategy. Because there is a figure of merit there of time and money. And for those of you in engineering that had a little bit of marketing, you'll know that it's frequency times impact. And so you can have a single event, which is massive impact, like a Super Bowl ad, and perhaps establish your brand. Or you can have a series of smaller events with lots of frequency and achieve the same results. So there's a figure of merit there. So what do you brand? This is perhaps the single most important decision you as a startup would have to make. And it's a complex one. Do you brand the company or do you brand the product? Or do you brand both? And can you afford to brand both? That's a huge challenge. And can you afford to not create two brands? Now in tech, what I have found over the years is strategies change rapidly. And the products to meet those strategies also change. And so you have to decide, am I going to constantly rebrand or am I going to have two brands? One brand which is sort of the consistent brand and the other brand that's constantly changing beneath. And that's a huge challenge because whatever you decide to do, it's going to cost money and your time. So brand objectives, creating value. Ego adventures do not create value. Be careful. And ego adventures are generally related to consumer and broad market type of activities. Super Bowl ads is my favorite. But you have to be careful of that. That's the siren song of which many ships founder on the shoals. You have precious time and precious money. Make sure you're spending it in the best place, either at the corporate side or the product side. Can you afford it? And one of the biggest things about brand development, how much time do you have? Most of the times with startups, you're there because you've come up with something very unique. You are an ice cream cone melting in the middle of July. You have to be very careful where you put your time and resources. It's a real tough one. So, what do you have to decide? Well, think of your stakeholders. Who do I want to brand to? Because with your stakeholders come audiences. If you want to brand customers in software, for example, you go to Gartner. Actually, it's misspelled, but you go to Gartner. Investors, you obviously go to Wall Street or Bay Street. Employees, go to rankings. Oh, top 10 company in Canada to work for, that sort of thing. And uniquely, and folks like Dave Caputo and Bill Tatum in the community here have made a fine art of doing this. You actually brand with your competitors. And you'd say, what do you mean brand with your competitors? You focus on that one competitor or that one partner, and your brand is totally focused on one organization. Why? Because you want them to buy you. So we've come from a brand of, billions of people in the world to potentially an audience of just one company, just one manager within that company. So you have to think about brand in a very flexible way. All are important over time, but which one is the optimal sequence? So let me give you an idea of some of the ways you can do it, and then we'll go to a sequence that I followed at OpenText. Brand associations, for my money over the last 25 years, have been the best bang for the buck. Takes a long time, but I give you an example of a brand association right just this moment when I said, well, OpenText runs the London Underground, and we just talked about the Internet of Things, and so I associated a brand for you with OpenText. It's easy, it takes time to build it up, but it's a very useful method, very effective. Events, high impact requires frequency, speaking publicly, going to the right targeted place. Trust me, when you're the ice cream cone melting in the middle of July, getting on that plane to go do that event, that's tough, but that is a way to do it with high impact. Advertising is the easiest, it's the laziest way to do it, going to Google and what have you and getting online ads, but it also is the most expensive. Acquiring, you can acquire brands. I've acquired brands over the years, but it's expensive, it's fast, but ultimately it's also confusing because you get brand confusion. And then finally, thought leadership, an opportunity to define the market. Now, I gave you an example of that in the first slide that I showed you. I showed you OpenText defining its market as electronic information management and having Forrester and Gartner and what have you say, yeah, they're the leading vendor in it. If I had said, oh, OpenText is in the software market or OpenText is in the internet market, then we're like 19th or 20th. But if you define your market, you can make yourself unique. So defining that audience in the market, you've got two choices. You can be the big fish in a little pond, or you can go for gold. And go for gold is sort of like that big home run hitter in baseball. You can swing for the fences, and every once in a while you will hit a home run, but a lot of times you're going to strike out. And you have to decide, you as a management team and your board. But if you define the market, if you have 10 million in sales, define a market with 100 million and win it. If you're in 100 million in sales, define a market with $1 billion and go win it. If you have $100,000 in sales, define a unique market that's $10 million and go win it. That's, you have to decide which way you want to play it. Thought leadership example, I started writing books about 10 years ago, and I brought a couple here because it allowed me to do brand association very quickly. So this is a book I just completed a few days ago with Mark Barrenshea, the CEO of OpenText. And I'll come back to this in a minute in terms of things that are available for you to brand associate with. But every third page has a story of a user because we're associating our brand with their brand. So, for example, what have we got here? This is a canton in Switzerland. And I think I had the city of Vancouver earlier. But you see, the usefulness of that is that you can brand associate anywhere in the world. So, for example, the June 2010 G20 Summit in Toronto, for example, that kind of thing. So what that's done is that's resulted in over 1 million readers over a 10-year period. And to give you an idea, 10,000 books sold in Canada is a bestseller. So you can create this. It takes time, and you have to have a customer base. The other interesting thing is customers love to be associated with a book or something like that. And as you can imagine, something like a book, I got kidded a lot over the last 10 years because my company has spent most of its time digitizing the world, not printing paper. And yet, all the digital natives had to go to who to get permission to buy our software or our cloud services? They had to go to non-digital natives. They had to go to managers that were 40 or 50 or 60 years old. They read books, not blogs. Remember your audience. Remember what you're targeting towards. So early days for you startups. Use the brands that got you started. The most important one that OpenText uses to this day is University of Waterloo. We were founded from research at the University of Waterloo. It is a fantastic brand. Associate with it. Location in Waterloo or Waterloo region if you're in Kitchener. Previous employer, be it Research in Motion or BlackBerry, or having won an award or been in Velocity at Communitech. Those are all great brand associations. The single most effective global brand association that you could have is Canada. In the last 5 years, Canada as a brand ranks #1 and #2 in the world. This book is on government. It could have been full of references all over the world. We made sure about 1/3 of all the cities, province, states, national organizations, agencies were Canadian. Why? Because by far and away, the most effective brand. And if you're going to do things like the Internet of Things, and as Jim was saying, in the post-Snowden world, you want to be in Canada, not the United States. Because in Canada, we're not subject to something called the Patriot Act. So, and again, it goes on and on. The venture capitalists that you work with, the awards that you get, you have lots of things that you can do. Key moments for OpenText, and I'll just skip through this really quickly to give you an idea. We started with technology partners. OpenText started as a joint project between Oxford University and the University of Waterloo to digitize the Oxford English Dictionary. People to this day still come up to me 25 years later and talk about that project. We heavily branded that at the beginning. If you're coming as a spinoff from UW, heavily brand that. Very smart. And the folks at University of Waterloo are fantastic to brand associate with. They're 25 years more experienced now compared to when I started. Things like Netscape. And I'll come back to Netscape in a second to give you an idea of the danger of brand association, because brands change. And so what may be a really positive brand right now may not be a positive brand later. And so you have to be careful about how you interchange your brands in Yahoo and things like that. We move to customers, I mentioned before, then to investors, and then finally on competitors. OpenText logos and product brands. I just threw some of them up to give you an idea of how OpenText at the beginning was teaching the intranet, because we had to make a decision to stop being a retail and go behind the firewall. And then to illustrate that further, I wrote a book, yet another book, and this book's called Behind the Firewall, and it's all about the internet that's hidden. And for a while there, we had our logo where it said intranet to emphasize the fact that we weren't on the public internet. And that's a challenge, because the public internet is where everyone knows. But the reality is behind the firewall is harder to talk about, and yet less competition. And so on. And then you can see a variety of the product brands. If we had heavily branded our first product, which was LiveLink, that would have been a real problem later on, because we kept evolving the product. Brand association with customers, as we'd already mentioned. The thought leadership books, as I tried to show you. The bottom line is, though, spend time thinking about branding, because it'll create perhaps the most value in your firm. Thanks.